Hey there, deep divers. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an insightful journey with us.
Insightful journey. I like that.
Today we are tackling a topic that's crucial for anyone interested in how India works, whether you're a budding UPSC aspirant, a curious student, or just a citizen who wants to be more informed,
Right.
strengthening India's electoral and governance systems.
Yeah.
Think of this deep dive as your crash course, guided by insights from slumia.com.com. We're about to uncover some fascinating stuff about how India chooses its leaders
Absolutely.
and how the government actually functions, warts and all.
It's like peeking behind the curtain of the world's largest democracy,
Exactly.
understanding the machinery that makes it all tick.
And you know what's really interesting? We're going to discover how accountability plays out in this complex system.
Oh, yeah. Accountability, that's a big one.
On paper, it seems straightforward. Civil servants should be answerable to both the government and the people.
In theory, yes. But the source material really highlights how that's harder than it sounds.
Oh, definitely. It's not as simple as it seems.
For instance, it points out that a lot of what civil servants do involves shaping policies, not just delivering tangible services.
Right, not like they're, manufacturing something concrete.
Exactly. So how do you measure their performance when the quote-unquote output isn't something you can easily quantify?
It's not like they're assembling gadgets on an assembly line where you can just count the finished products at the end of the day, right?
Precisely.
And then there's this whole idea of diffusion of responsibility, which the source material delves into.
Oh, yes, diffusion of responsibility. It makes me think of those group projects back in school where everyone kind of assumes someone else is taking the lead and then surprise, no one actually did the work.
That's a great analogy.
The source uses the term moral hazard to describe this situation. It's the idea that when individuals aren't held directly accountable for their actions, they're more likely to take risks or shirk responsibility.
It's kind of like passing the buck, right?
Exactly. And in a large bureaucracy, it can be really easy for things to fall through the cracks if everyone's assuming someone else is handling it.
So what's the solution? How do you make sure civil servants are actually accountable for their performance, especially when their work involves these complex long-term policies?
Well, the source material dives into a fascinating discussion about performance reviews.
Okay, performance reviews, how do those fit in?
It contrasts the traditional Indian system of closed annual confidential reports, or ACRs, with the more open systems that are gaining traction in other sectors.
Okay, so the traditional system versus the newer, more open ones.
Right. Imagine working in a system where your performance review is basically a secret.
A secret? What do you mean?
Your superiors write up an evaluation, but you don't even get to see it unless there's something negative in there.
That sounds incredibly frustrating. It's like getting a grade on a test you never get to see.
Exactly. How can you possibly learn from your mistakes or improve if you don't even know what areas need work?
Right, it seems counterproductive.
The source argues that this lack of transparency can breed a culture of distrust and discourage open communication.
It makes sense when you put it that way.
And then it contrasts this with the idea of a more open system where you'd have clear goals set at the beginning of the year, regular check-ins with your supervisor, and feedback from multiple sources, not just your direct boss.
That definitely sounds more familiar to me.
More like what you'd see in the private sector these days.
Yeah, it's like the performance review systems many companies are moving towards.
Hmm.
Where you stand, what's expected of you, and you have the opportunity to give and receive feedback openly.
The source highlights that this type of system is more in line with the recommendations of the Second Administrative Reforms Commission.
Okay, the Second Administrative Reforms Commission. What do they have to say about this?
Well, they emphasize transparency and a participatory approach to performance management.
Makes sense. It's not just a top-down evaluation.
Right. It's about creating a dialogue and a culture of continuous improvement.
Of course, a more open system isn't a magic bullet, right? It requires a cultural shift.
Absolutely. It requires a culture of open communication and constructive feedback, which can be challenging to cultivate in any organization, especially a large bureaucracy.
It's definitely more than just ticking boxes and filling out forms.
Speaking of more than just ticking boxes, the source material also tackles the tricky topic of ethics in governance.
Okay, ethics and governance. Now, that's something that applies to all of us, not just civil servants.
Exactly. And it makes a really important point. Being an ethical civil servant isn't just about following the rules. It's about something more.
So it's about going beyond just what's written in the rule book.
It's about internalizing those principles of integrity, impartiality, and a genuine commitment to public service.
It's about understanding that you're serving the people, not just following orders, right?
Precisely.
So imagine you're that civil servant faced with a tough decision. The rulebook might give you one answer, but what does your conscience tell you?
It's about aligning your actions with your values even when it's difficult.
What's the right thing to do, not just for your career, but for the people you're ultimately responsible
Mhm.
to?
It's about asking yourself, what would a truly ethical person do in this situation?
Okay, let's zoom out a bit now and picture the sheer scale of elections in India.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
We're talking about a country with a population larger than that of Europe, with incredible diversity and a commitment to democratic principles.
Yeah.
How on earth do you even begin to organize something like that?
Well, the source material introduces us to the hero of this story, the Election Commission of India, or ECI.
Ah, yes, the ECI. They're the ones who make sure everything runs smoothly.
Exactly. This independent body is tasked with ensuring that elections are free and fair, and it has a huge role in every stage of the process, from registering political parties to setting the election schedule and allotting those all-important election symbols.
So they're like the referees of the entire election game, making sure everyone plays by the rules.
That's a great way to put it.
But here's a detail from the source that really surprised me. The ECI can't actually deregister political parties. That's right.
That seems like a pretty significant limitation, doesn't it?
It does raise questions about the extent of the ECI's regulatory power.
So if a party is consistently engaging in unethical or illegal activities, the ECI can't just kick them out of the game.
Not exactly. The source also dives into other challenges the ECI grapples with. Like, how do you effectively monitor the influence of money in politics?
Yeah, that's a big one. Money can really skew things.
And how do you ensure that internal party democracy is functioning properly?
That's something we often overlook. We tend to focus on the big picture, but what's happening within the parties themselves is crucial.
Absolutely. And then there's the ever-present issue of preventing electoral malpractices.
It's a lot to juggle.
It's like trying to herd cats.
And to complicate things even further, we've got this whole alphabet soup of terms and regulations related to elections in India.
Alphabet soup.
RPA, MCC, EVMs. It's enough to make your head spin.
Let's break it down then.
Okay, lead the way.
Let's start with the bedrock of the system. The Representation of the People Act, or RPA. The RPA. That sounds important.
This act lays out the fundamental rules of the game, covering everything from who can contest elections to what constitutes a corrupt practice during campaigning.
So it's like the Constitution of Indian elections.
It could say that.
Yes. And then we've got the infamous Model Code of Conduct, or MCC.
DMCC, that's a hot topic.
The source mentions there's this whole debate about whether it should be legally binding. Right now, it's more of a set of guidelines that the Election Commission encourages parties to follow.
Precisely. And the source lays out the arguments on both sides of this debate.
Okay, what are the pros and cons of making it legally binding?
Well, those who support making the MCC legally binding argue that it would give the ECI more power to actually enforce these ethical guidelines and deter violations.
So it would give them more teeth to actually punish those who break the rules.
Exactly. But then there are concerns that it would create a flood of legal challenges, potentially slowing down the entire electoral process.
So it's a balancing act between ensuring fairness and maintaining efficiency.
That's the crux of it.
And of course, even with the best rules in place, it ultimately comes down to the willingness of political parties and candidates to actually play fair.
It's about fostering a culture of ethical conduct, not just relying on rules and regulations.
And speaking of things that spark heated debates, we can't forget about the elephant in the room, or should I say the EVM in the polling booth.
Yes. Electronic voting machines, always a controversial topic.
Have they truly lived up to their promise, or are those concerns about hacking and malfunctioning legitimate?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The source material does a great job of presenting both sides of this argument.
Okay, lay it on us. What are the main points of contention?
On one hand, EVMs were introduced to tackle very real issues like booth capturing and rigging that were rampant with the old paper ballot system.
Right, those were serious problems that needed to be addressed.
Absolutely, and to a large extent, they have been successful in achieving that goal. But on the other hand, those concerns about security and potential for manipulation haven't entirely gone away.
So it's a trade-off between efficiency and security.
In a way, yes.
And that's where VVPTs, or voter-verified paper audit trails, come in, right?
Exactly. They provide that crucial paper trail, giving voters a physical record of their vote that can be used to verify the electronic count.
So it's like a backup system, a way to double-check the result.
Precisely. The source highlights that the expanded use of VVPTs is a significant step towards addressing those concerns about EVM reliability.
So it's all about increasing transparency and building trust in the system.
That's the goal.
Now, have you ever been in that situation where you look at the candidates on the ballot and think, ugh, none of these people deserve my vote?
I think we've all been there at some point.
Right. You're like, is this really the best we can do?
Exactly, and that's where the NOTA option comes in.
NOTA, what's that?
It stands for none of the above, and it allows voters to express their dissatisfaction with all the candidates.
So it's like a protest vote, a way of saying, I'm here, I'm participating, but I'm not happy with the choices. But it's important to remember that NOTA, as it exists in India right now, is more of a protest vote than a true right to reject.
That's right. Even if NOTA gets the most votes, the candidate with the highest number of votes among the actual candidates still wins.
So it's a way to send a message, but it doesn't directly change the outcome of the election.
That's the key difference. It's about making your voice heard, but not about rejecting the entire slate of candidates.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like saying, look, I'm showing up to vote because I believe in participating in the democratic process, but I'm not satisfied with any of the choices presented to me.
Precisely.
And that distinguishes it from a true right to reject system,
Right.
where a candidate could actually be rejected if enough voters choose that option, potentially triggering a new election with different candidates.
You're right. That's a whole different ballgame.
Okay. It's time to get real about some of the darker aspects of Indian politics. The source material doesn't shy away from this, the criminalization of politics and the prevalence of vote bank politics.
Yeah, those are some serious issues that we need to address head on.
The statistics presented in the source are pretty alarming. A significant number of elected representatives in India have criminal records, some with serious charges against them.
It's a disturbing trend.
It really makes you question the integrity of the system. How can we as citizens have faith in a system where people with such serious allegations against them are making laws?
It erodes public trust and undermines the legitimacy of our democratic institutions.
The source delves into this complex issue of vote bank politics, where parties appeal to specific groups based on caste, religion, or other identity markers.
It's about mobilizing voters based on these identities rather than on shared interests or a common vision for the country.
It can create a really toxic dynamic where politicians focus more on dividing people along these lines than on actually addressing the issues that affect everyone.
Exactly. And while vote bank politics can have some positive aspects in terms of ensuring representation for marginalized groups.
Right. It's about ensuring that all voices are heard.
It's easily misused. It becomes less about genuine representation and more about exploiting existing divisions for political gain.
It's a slippery slope.
The source reminds us that we as citizens are not powerless in this situation.
So what can we do?
We can choose to reject candidates with criminal backgrounds, demand a greater transparency from our elected officials, and hold them accountable for their actions.
It's about being informed, engaged citizens, not just passive observers.
Exactly.
And speaking of representation, one of the most striking statistics from the source material is that India lags behind even Pakistan when it comes to women's political participation.
That's a stark reminder of the deeply ingrained gender inequalities that persist in our society.
And a wake-up call.
The source analyzes some of the key barriers women face in entering politics.
Like, what are some of those barriers?
Well, there are societal norms and family pressures, lack of financial resources, and lack of support from political parties.
So it's a multifaceted issue. It's not just one thing holding women back. It's not just about having more women in positions of power for the sake of optics. It's about recognizing that diverse perspectives lead to better decision-making.
Absolutely.
When women are actively involved in shaping policies, those policies are more likely to reflect the needs and experiences of all citizens.
It's about ensuring that our democracy truly represents the people it serves.
And that brings us to the end of part 1 of our deep dive into strengthening India's electoral and governance systems.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
From the challenges of ensuring accountability in the civil services to the complexities of the Indian electoral system, and we've just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to explore.
But we've laid the groundwork for some even deeper exploration. Join us for part 2, where we'll continue our journey through this fascinating and ever-evolving landscape.
I can't wait to dive back in. Welcome back, deep divers. Ready for round 2 of our exploration.
Absolutely. We're picking up right where we left off, exploring how India's electoral and governance systems are constantly evolving.
And building on that idea of ethical conduct in politics, we're diving into a topic that's been in the news quite a bit lately. The Model Code of Conduct, or MCC.
Ah, yes, the MCC. It's not just some dusty old rule book, right?
Right. It's designed to ensure a level playing field for everyone during elections.
So it's all about setting those ground rules, making sure things are fair.
That's right. It's about setting standards for behavior during the campaign period, covering everything from the content of speeches and manifestos to the use of government resources and the conduct of rallies.
So it really covers a lot of ground.
It's a pretty comprehensive set of guidelines.
The source material traces the origins of the MCC back to 1960 during the Kerala Assembly elections. It's fascinating how it's evolved over time, adapting to the changing dynamics of Indian politics.
Yeah, it's definitely not static. It's been revised and updated over the years to keep pace with the times.
And one of the biggest debates surrounding the MCC is whether it should be made legally binding.
Right now, it's more of a gentleman's agreement, so to speak.
A gentleman's agreement.
Well, it's more of a set of guidelines that the Election Commission strongly encourages parties to follow.
But it doesn't have the force of law behind it.
Exactly, and the source material lays out the arguments on both sides.
So what are the main points in favor of making it legally binding?
Well, supporters argue that it would give the ECI more teeth to actually enforce these ethical guidelines and deter violations.
So it would be more than just a slap on the wrist if you break the rules.
Right, there would be actual consequences.
But what about the arguments against making it legally binding?
The main concern is that it could lead to a flood of litigation.
Litigation, meaning lawsuits and legal challenges.
Exactly, and that could potentially bog down the entire electoral process.
So it's a classic dilemma, right?
Yeah.
You want to ensure fair play and prevent abuse, but you also don't want to create a system that's so rigid that it becomes impractical.
It's a tough balancing act, finding that sweet spot between regulation and efficiency.
And then there's the added challenge of regulating the use of media, especially social media, during elections. It's like the Wild West out there.
It's a whole new frontier, and the rules are still being written.
It's hard to keep up with the pace of technology.
The source material highlights how difficult it is to track the flow of information in this age of social media. Anyone can say anything, and it spreads like wildfire.
It's like trying to contain a wildfire with a garden hose.
Exactly. And it's hard to distinguish fact from fiction, which makes it challenging for the ECI to monitor and regulate election-related content.
It's like playing whack-a-mole with misinformation. As soon as you address one false claim, another one pops up somewhere else.
And it's not just about blatant lies. There's also the issue of subtle manipulation, using algorithms and targeted advertising to influence voters' perceptions.
It's scary how sophisticated these techniques have become.
It really is.
So what's the solution? How do we navigate this minefield of misinformation?
Well, a big part of it comes down to us as citizens.
So it's not just about the ECI or the government, it's about individual responsibility.
Exactly. We need to be more critical of the information we consume, verify sources, and not blindly share everything we see online.
It's about being media literate, recognizing that not everything you see on social media is true, and understanding how these platforms can be used to manipulate our opinions.
It's about taking ownership of our own information consumption.
And speaking of being informed, the source material dives into the importance of voter education.
It's not enough to just get people to the polling booth, right?
Right. They need to understand what they're voting for.
They need to understand the issues, the candidates, and the power their vote holds.
So it's about empowering citizens to make informed choices, not just casting a vote out of habit or based on rumors.
Precisely. And in a country as diverse as India with so many different languages, cultures, and levels of literacy, voter education is a monumental task.
It's a huge undertaking.
The source highlights the ECI's Systematic Voters Education and Electoral Participation Program, or SVEP.
SVEP, that sounds like a pretty comprehensive initiative.
It is. It's a multifaceted initiative aimed at increasing awareness about the electoral process and encouraging active participation.
So it's about reaching out to every segment of the population, making sure everyone understands how the system works.
Exactly. And it needs to be creative and innovative, tailoring its approach to different groups.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. It's about using various channels from traditional media to social media and community outreach programs.
The source material also mentions some really cool technological innovations that are being used to improve the electoral process.
Oh yeah, technology can play a huge role in making elections more efficient and transparent.
Like the Saivia Jail app, which allows citizens to report violations of the Model Code of Conduct in real time.
That's a fantastic example of how technology can empower citizens to participate in ensuring fair elections. It gives people a direct channel to report any wrongdoing they witness, which helps build trust and accountability.
It's like having a watchdog in your pocket.
Exactly. And of course, we can't talk about technology and elections without addressing the ongoing debate over electronic voting machines.
The EVM issue just keeps coming back, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and the source material acknowledges that those concerns about EVM security and the possibility of tampering haven't gone away.
So despite the fact that EVMs were introduced to address issues like booth capturing and rigging,
Right, those were serious problems that needed to be tackled.
and to a large extent, EVMs have been successful in achieving that goal.
But those security concerns still linger.
And that's precisely why the expanded use of VVPPs, or voter-verified paper audit trails, is so crucial.
VVPPs provide that all-important paper trail.
So it's like having a backup system just in case.
Exactly, allowing voters to verify that their vote has been recorded correctly and giving election officials a way to audit the results if needed.
So it's all about striking that balance between leveraging technology to improve efficiency and transparency, while also ensuring that the process remains verifiable and trustworthy.
Finding that balance is key.
Speaking of exploring different electoral systems, the source material delves into a fascinating discussion about proportional representation.
Ah, yes, proportional representation, or PR. It's a different way of thinking about how we elect our representatives.
Right now, India primarily uses the first-past-the-post system, where the candidate with the most votes in a constituency wins even if they don't get a majority.
It's a winner-take-all system.
But under a PR system, the number of seats a party wins in the legislature is proportional to the percentage of votes it receives in the election.
So in theory, it's a system that's more representative of the overall vote share.
It gives smaller parties a better chance of winning seats.
Exactly, and it prevents a single party from dominating the legislature even if it doesn't have the support of a majority of the voters.
So it could lead to more diverse representation in Parliament.
That's the idea, but the source is careful to point out that there are various types of PR systems, and the choice of system can significantly impact the outcome.
So it's not as simple as just saying, let's switch to PR.
Right, the devil is in the details.
There are also concerns about whether PR would lead to more fragmented legislatures and make it harder to form stable governments, especially in a country as diverse as India.
Those are valid concerns. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
But it's a debate worth having as we think about how to make our democracy even more responsive to the will of the people.
Absolutely, it's all about exploring different options and finding what works best for India.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, fellow explorers of Indian democracy.
Glad to be back.
We've journeyed through the nitty-gritty of elections, grappled with ethical dilemmas, and even peeked into the future of technology's role in governance.
It's been quite a journey.
But for this final leg of our deep dive, we're going to zoom out and look at the big picture.
The big picture sounds good.
And one of the big picture ideas the source material throws our way is the concept of simultaneous elections, or SE.
Simultaneous elections, okay?
Imagine a scenario where elections for the Lok Sabha and all state assemblies happen at the same time.
So everything all at once. Exactly. It's not some futuristic fantasy. India actually practiced this until 1967.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
The source material lays out some compelling arguments for bringing back SE.
Okay, like what? What are the benefits?
Think about holding multiple elections throughout the year is a massive logistical undertaking.
Yeah, it's a huge operation.
It's expensive. It puts a strain on administrative resources, and it can feel like the country is constantly in campaign mode.
It's like one election ends and another one begins.
It's like having a never-ending election season, which can be pretty exhausting for everyone involved, from the candidates and political parties to the voters themselves.
Yeah, election fatigue is a real thing.
SE advocates argue that synchronizing these elections could save money, streamline the process, and allow the government to focus more on governing and less on campaigning.
So it's about efficiency and focus.
It sounds pretty appealing on the surface.
Yeah, less time campaigning, more time governing.
But the source material doesn't shy away from presenting the counter-arguments either.
Okay, there are always two sides to every coin. Some critics worry that bundling national and state elections together could dilute voter judgment.
Dilute voter judgment? How so?
It might become harder for voters to distinguish between issues specific to their state and those that are national in scope.
So it could get confusing for voters trying to sort out all the different issues.
Imagine trying to weigh a candidate's stance on local issues, like infrastructure development or education policy, against their position on national issues, like foreign policy or economic reforms.
It's like mixing apples and oranges.
It could get pretty messy. It's like trying to order from a menu where all the dishes are listed together without any categories or headings.
Yeah, you might end up with a meal that's a bit of a mishmash.
The source also highlights concerns that SE could reduce the accountability of governments.
Reduce accountability.
If a party sweeps both state and national elections, It might feel less pressure to be responsive to the needs of voters, knowing that the next election is several years away.
So they might become complacent.
It's like getting a 5-year hall pass, which might not be the best recipe for good governance.
And then there's the issue of federalism.
Federalism.
India's system of governance is built on a delicate balance of power between the central government and the states.
Right. That's a key feature of our democracy.
Critics of SEs worry that holding simultaneous elections could tilt that balance in favor of the central government, potentially undermining the autonomy of states.
So it's about protecting that balance of power between the center and the states.
Exactly.
It's a debate with valid points on both sides. It's about weighing the potential benefits of efficiency and cost savings against the potential risks to voter judgment accountability and the spirit of federalism.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Speaking of complex issues with no easy answers, the source material delves into another hot-button topic, electoral funding.
Electoral funding, now that's a can of worms.
It's like peeking into a Pandora's box of controversies and shady dealings.
It's where money and politics collide.
The source material points out some pretty serious flaws in the current system. There's a lack of transparency in donations, limited action taken against bribery, and recent changes that allow for unlimited corporate donations and even foreign funding.
So the system is ripe for abuse.
It's like the Wild West of political financing, where the rules are murky and accountability is scarce.
It's a breeding ground for corruption.
Wealthy donors can essentially buy influence and favorable policies, creating an uneven playing field where those with deep pockets have an unfair advantage.
It undermines the very idea of a level playing field.
Where every candidate has an equal chance of success based on the merit of their ideas and their ability to connect with voters.
Right, it shouldn't be about who can spend the most money.
The source explores potential solutions to this mess.
Okay, solutions are always good.
Like stricter regulations on donations, greater transparency in party finances, and even the possibility of state funding of elections.
State funding of elections, that's a pretty radical idea.
It is. It would involve the government providing funds to political parties to cover their campaign expenses.
So taxpayers would be footing the bill for political campaigns.
I can already hear the arguments against it. Concerns about misuse of funds, stifling new parties and independent candidates, and the whole idea of taxpayers essentially footing the bill for political campaigns.
Those are legitimate concerns.
But proponents of state funding argue that it could help level the playing field and reduce the influence of money in politics.
So it's about taking money out of the equation.
It's about ensuring that elections are decided by the quality of ideas and the support of voters, not by who has the biggest bankroll.
It's about putting the focus back on the voters.
Well, deep divers, we've reached the end of our deep dive into strengthening India's electoral and governance systems.
It's been quite a journey.
We've tackled some weighty issues, explored contrasting viewpoints, and hopefully sparked some critical thinking about how our democracy functions and how it can be improved.
It's all about being informed and engaged citizens.
And just like democracy, our learning journey never truly ends.
We're always learning and growing.
We've given you the tools and insights to navigate this complex landscape. Now it's up to you to keep digging, keep questioning, and keep demanding better from our elected officials and from ourselves as citizens.
Democracy is a work in progress.
And that wraps up another deep dive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those conversations going.
Stay curious, deep divers.